Hey guys, it's Erica, and in today's video I'm going to be talking about this gorgeous plant, which is a Rhaphidophora tetrasperma. And this plant is commonly known as a mini monstera or a philodendron ginny, but it is not a philodendron and it is not a monstera. It's actually, they're all in the same family though, so that's how they're related, in the family of aroid / Araceae. I don't really know how to pronounce that, so I just say aroid. But this is an aroid, same as philodendrons and monsteras. This plant is, I found, to be a lot like a Monstera deliciosa. So they require the same care needs, they kind of grow at the same rate. This is a very easy plant to care for. It grows pretty quickly, and it also has these beautiful fenestrations. So first, let's go over the light requirements. This plant does need a lot of bright and direct sunlight, and you can give it less sunlight than that, but it is not going to grow as quickly. The leaves probably aren't going to get as big. It just prefers overall more sunlight. But if you give it too much sun, if you give it too much direct light, it will burn, and also the leaves will kind of turn a little bit yellow. So this leaf probably had too much sun. I keep mine in my eastern facing porch, and I just had it a little bit too close to the edge of the porch, so it wasn't really shading the plant enough, and it got a little bit of too much sun, as you can see here on this leaf. Morning sunlight is okay for this plant, so an east facing window is really good for this plant. You could keep it in a north facing window, maybe farther away from the actual window so that direct sunlight doesn't fall on it if you have it in a west or a south facing window. But they do prefer more sunlight, and if you give it more sun, it will reward you with this beautiful growth. I also have another one actually behind me. It's in there. I have another one of these plants, and it's under a grow light right now. That one isn't growing as quickly as the ones that I keep outside. So natural sunlight, this plant does prefer natural sunlight, but you can keep it under a grow light. It will still grow, it will still thrive under there, but I found that it does grow faster in real sunlight. I'll actually compare them. So this plant, since I bought them around the same time, and as you can see, this one is a lot bigger than this one, but this one is putting out new growth here. This one's also putting out new growth. It's late November now, it's almost December, actually in like 2 days. So it is winter time, and both of these plants are still growing. I do live in Southern California though, so that might be a reason why. So you can definitely see that this one is bigger than this one. When I got them, they were about the same size. This one was a little bit not as healthy, which is why I kept it indoors. But I have found that they do prefer real sunlight. For watering needs, usually my rule of thumb is to water whenever the soil is dry. It is always better to underwater your plant than to overwater it. A plant, once it gets root rot, it's a lot harder to save than if your plant just needs a little pick-me-up, some water, and it'll go back to good. I usually don't water this plant until the soil is completely dry, and it's not really the best tactic to just only water it when the soil is completely dry, but that's what I've been doing, and it has been growing just fine that way. But if you do it that way, you can see that it starts kind of browning. It dries up right here. So this is how a fresh one, not dry, looks. I don't know what it's called, but this is how fresh one that's not dried out looks. And then as your plant doesn't get enough water, it starts drying out and getting brown. That part of the plant where the new leaf comes out. I would say that if you stick your finger into the soil about this deep and see that much of the soil is dry, I think that would be a good time to water. Probably better than what I've been doing, but just so you know, if you forget to water this plant, it's gonna be 100% fine. You don't need to worry about that at all. And depending on a bunch of different factors, your watering schedule may look different to someone else's watering schedule. So it may be fine for me to wait super long until I water this plant, but if you wait as long as me, your plant might dry out and it won't be happy at all. So there's a whole bunch of factors: the amount of light you're giving it, the kind of soil it's in, how well draining it is, if it's in a terracotta pot or a plastic pot, and the humidity. I don't know if I mentioned that one. If you want an actual amount of days between each watering, I would say once a week is a good place to start. In the winter, if your plant isn't growing, definitely cut down on watering than in the summertime. So in the spring and summer, I'm most definitely going to water this plant more so that it can grow faster. From my experience, you don't need to worry about the kind of water you're using. Usually I water all of my plants with filtered water. This one I've been watering with a hose because it's outside and it's just easier for me, and it's been doing fine. It doesn't mind having hose water, but I would recommend to use filtered water when you can. So I guess that leads us into fertilizing this plant. I would recommend a gentle, balanced fertilizer. I really like to use fish fertilizer. That is a natural fertilizer. You can also use a very gentle synthetic one. I would say to fertilize it maybe 2 to 3 times a month in the growing season, and maybe cut that back to once every 2 months, or just not at all in the dormancy season, so fall or winter, and the plant will be very happy with that. Now we're getting into my favorite topic, which is soil. Soil that this plant would appreciate. Usually when buying a new plant, I will leave them in their nursery pot for as long as possible. And that's partly because I'm lazy and partly because I want the plant to kind of get used to its new environment. And it likes its old soil, it's what it grew up in. If you really want to repot your plant right away, I would say at least leave it in its nursery pot for a week before you go ahead and repot it. For the soil, I like to make my own soils. It's really fun. And I would recommend 40% Coir or peat moss for the water retentive base, and then go in with 30% pumice, 20% orchid bark, and you want it to be a chunky soil because this plant is an aroid, so it does like to climb. So giving it that orchid bark really helps its roots kind of like be strong roots. And then 10% of worm castings, and the worm castings is there for nutrients. And the pumice / perlite and orchid bark are there to aerate the soil. Speaking about this plant being an aroid, it would be best for this plant to be staked. If you want, of course, you can let it trail. It will start trailing like a philodendron, like a trailing philodendron if you let it, but the leaves won't get as big. They might not have the same fenestrations. It's just gonna look a lot scragglier. Usually when you stake a plant up, like even if you stake a pothos, its leaves will get bigger and bigger as it climbs up that stake. Same goes for Rhaphidophora tetrasperma. It's gonna be a lot happier if you stake it up. But by all means, if you want this plant to trail for you, go ahead and let that happen. But if you want your plant to get more fenestrations and you want the leaves to get bigger, I would definitely recommend maybe a moss pole or whatever you want to use to stake the plant up. I'm gonna be staking mine up in the spring because it is getting pretty big. Another factor that will help your plant grow is humidity. So this plant would prefer higher humidity. If you don't live in a humid area and you keep your plant inside, you can definitely put it near a humidifier. Generally, the room that I'm in right now, I do keep around 60% humidity, and I think that would be very good for this plant. But with that being said, if you do not have a humidifier, that is completely fine as well. These plants are not super picky. They're not like a calathea or a maranta where they absolutely need the humidity. If you don't have a humidifier, that's completely fine. If you want, you can put it on a pebble tray so that as the water evaporates from the pebble tray, it will kind of create humidity around the plant. You can keep jars of water around the plant and that will create a certain amount of humidity. But like I said, if you don't have a humidifier, that's fine. This one has been growing outside, and Southern California isn't really super humid, and it's been doing great. So if you have a humidifier, that is great. It will probably help your plant grow faster and bigger. But if you do not have a humidifier, don't worry, because it's not going to be detrimental to your plant. Alright, and lastly, hopefully I haven't forgotten anything, we're going to be talking about propagation. So this plant can be propagated by soil, water, or even air layering. I personally have not propagated this plant yet, but I have seen it been done these 3 different ways. Pretty much for propagation of most plants, you just want to cut below the node, below a node, and nodes on plants are usually located where a leaf connects to the stem. And you can see here, this is a node. There's a little baby aerial root growing out of there. There's one growing out of here. There's actually 2 growing out of here, and it just continues that way on the whole entire plant. So like I said, you cut below a little bit below, like you can cut maybe halfway here. Just leave a little bit of stem below. You don't want to cut directly onto the node, so just cut a little bit below the node, just snap that off, and you can place it into a jar of water. Just make sure that the actual leaves aren't touching the water, because they will rot in the water and roots will grow from there. I've heard that for this plant specifically, rooting it in soil or rooting it in, I guess, sphagnum moss or whatever you're rooting it in, is faster than rooting in water. So I'm gonna test that out when the plant gets big enough, because right now it's still a little bit small and I just want to wait till it grows more before I start cutting it up. And of course, if you want to use rooting hormone, that will help with how quickly the plant roots, but you don't need to use rooting hormone. If you want, you can dab it in cinnamon, and that's kind of like a rooting hormone. Alright you guys, that is it for today's video. Hopefully I didn't leave anything out. If I did, you can go ahead and add it into the comments below. If you have any questions, leave those in the comments as well. I hope you enjoyed the video. I hope you found it helpful, and I will see you guys next time. Thank you so much for watching. Bye!